Welcome to episode 7.5 of Solarpunk Presents, in which Ariel and I pay tribute to four of the great things that we have in our societies that we tend to take for granted and that we ought to fight like hell with love and joy not to lose. Before we start this episode, don't forget to support us on Patreon and then, join our YouTube and all of this kind of stuff. And Ariel would like to say, or I'm going to say for Ariel, that she's sorry she had a cold when we recorded this. And so sometimes her voice is a little, hoarse. Please forgive her. And now for the episode.
Right now, it's hard to keep reading the news. There's just so much that's going wrong in the world.
Never mind the floods, fires, cyclones, earthquakes, and other major natural disasters, many of which have been aided, abetted, and intensified by global warming.
Humanity's inhumanity to other parts of humanity seems to be soaring right now, alongside authoritarianism and the bullying of smaller, weaker countries and territories by bigger, more militarized countries, and not that I would personally know anything about that.
And not to mention the sudden, I'd say unscheduled, disassembly of democracy in the USA. But obviously, dark forces have been working on this in the shadows for a while, and the chaos this is unleashing around the globe.
I mean, like I said, it's hard to keep reading the news right now, at least not without going apoplectic or getting depressed or some unholy combination of both.
But we're solar punks. If we were going to be so capitalistic as to have a brand, it would be hopefulness, optimism, and a belief that humanity could wake up tomorrow morning and decide to start forging its way down a brighter path toward a better, more just, more sustainable, more humane future for everyone.
And that means that right here, right now, in this episode, no belly aching about all the crap that's going down, as tempting as it is for me to just wallow.
We want to try the flip side.
We want to see how it goes when instead of going, "Ah, WTF, no, can you believe they did that? We are so screwed," we're going to reflect on the progress that we'd made towards the super cool world to live in before those selfish, destructive, and cruel people gained the power to start tearing down all of the hard work that people have been putting in over centuries to make life better for the rest of humanity.
What a cool idea! Stopping to reflect, with gratitude and admiration, on all the good that humanity has achieved. Those of us on the left tend to be more doom and gloomers. More, well, let's complain about all the things that aren't good enough yet. But who wants to invite people like us to the party, much less rally around our cause? I mean, not that I'm scarred from my high school years or anything like that. But what if we tried recognizing what was great about what we've achieved so far? I mean, what do you think? Would that help us unite and start to fight like hell to hang on to those accomplishments?
I certainly think so. And not to mention, one of the aims of this podcast is to showcase how ordinary people are working hard every day to achieve even a little bit of a solarpunk present, and maybe looking towards a solarpunk future for everyone. And I also just want to say before we move on that, yeah, those of us on the left tend to be more doom and gloom, but I think a lot of it comes from a really good place of you really want to criticize the things that you love.
And I think this is one of the things that separates the right from the left, and it's that the left's like, but we could be doing better, and we should be doing better, and it'd be so great if we were doing better, and I believe we could do better. And the right's like, you unpatriotic scum. But it would be an attitude adjustment. Instead of fighting against things like grumpy old sourpuss doom and gloom lefties, we could be fighting for things with good cheer and enthusiasm and without accusing other people of not fighting the good fight perfectly or with sufficient ideological purity.
Christina, you go first. What's one thing we should be proud of and fighting hard for?
Oh. You're putting me on the spot here. Tricky question, but
Your idea.
I'll but I'll start with one here. Here in, but not exclusively in the global north, that even people who complain about not having it totally take it for granted. A considerable freedom of expression, also known as the right to free speech. And by this I mean that we recognize that individuals or groups of people have the right to express their opinions and ideas, especially political ones, without fear of violence, imprisonment, fines, or censorship. It's kind of a hot button topic at the moment. And it doesn't mean that you get to run around slandering people. And it doesn't mean hate speech is legal. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong for people to ostracize you for saying mean, homophobic, transphobic, misogynistic, sexist, or racist things, etc. What it means is that it's okay for you to speak out against, for instance, the government without worrying about being thrown into prison, exiled, or otherwise neutralized.
That is, yeah.
We totally take it for granted. We can do all these things. And that is not a given. So, right? The recognition of this right is an amazing thing. And again, those of us who've grown up in liberal democracies totally take it for granted. Even the people who complain about all this woke people canceling them and all this stuff, they have free speech. They have free speech. And throughout recorded history and in large parts of the world today, this right is not recognized. Speaking out, even privately, against the ruling regime can be curtains for you in an awful lot of places. My spouse grew up in East Germany, where you couldn't even always express honest opinions at home because you never knew if the Stasi was listening or if one of your family members had had their arm twisted hard enough to start working for them. And enough wrong words, and you could find yourself blocked from educational opportunities, from promotion at work, or even from your job. Or you could even be imprisoned. This
Wow.
is not something we have to worry about
Yeah,
currently.
it sounds so. I mean, I've seen that movie, The Lives of Others, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I can't imagine having to live like that. It's something that we should be prepared to do, I guess.
No, no, we should not be prepared to do that. We should be prepared to say, no, we don't want to live that way.
Well, yes. In an ideal world, yes. Yes.
Well, and sometimes you also just have to be like, we're doing it anyway. They can't put us all in prison. Safety in numbers, kind of thing. It's kind of relevant now because the orange-skinned regime in the USA has used its first couple of months to begin butchering such freedom of expression. They have effectively rescinded the right for anyone, the right of free speech for anyone who isn't an American citizen, right? Leaving tourists, visa holders, and green card holders at danger of arrest, incarceration, and deportation at the hands of hooded, unidentifiable thugs. As and I hate to say it, since I live abroad, I don't know if it's ICE or ICE. I forgot to look that
Yeah,
up.
I don't know either. I just call it ice, I think.
I call
Uh
it ice too. We all know who we're talking about here. But anyway,
yeah.
as they slowly, or maybe not so slowly, start to feel their way toward being a modern analog of the Gestapo or, other aspects of the SS. So one of the last things I read in the paper the other day is that the American regime is in talks with, I think it's El Salvador or maybe it's some other country, anyway, somewhere in Latin America, to start taking deported American citizens into its prison. I mean, that is a bit of a black hole to get sent into,
Yeah, no kidding.
right? It's already bad enough if you're not an American citizen, but I mean, it's a whole other thing if you are. And what I mean by this is not that American citizens are better than other people or that they have more natural rights than other people, but that they have the basic constitutional right to reside in America. Legally, the government cannot take an American citizen and remove them from the country. That is completely unconstitutional. Your right to bear arms might be limited, and your right to free speech is not absolute, but you have the absolute right as an American citizen to remain in the United States of America. And if the Trump administration holds true on its threat to start deporting American citizens to prisons in other countries, it isn't going to restrict itself. I mean, there's just no way it's going to restrict itself to quote unquote violent criminals and gangsters. It's not hard to imagine that political dissent will be one of the things that gets you sent away into this place where the American rules don't apply. And then, even if you get out, how do you get back home? And it's dreadful. And it's likely to get much worse to the point where it may become only safe to express the opinions that it is officially safe to, officially okay to have, right? We don't want to let it get to that state.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be up to the opinions of some border official or ICE official
Right.
individual.
As much as some Americans like to imagine our government routinely surveils and assassinates opponents at home and abroad, and as much as our government kind of has done stuff like that, there aren't exactly many Americans who go to bed at night worried that the police or the NSA or ICE or whatever is going to knock down their door and disappear them in the dark hours before dawn because of something they've said. We don't yet have that fear. But so all the people who are complaining that they don't have free speech because people jump on them when they say stupid, crappy things, these people have no idea that they're confusing not having the freedom of speech with not having the freedom of speech without social consequences because you're a jerk.
Exactly.
So let's take a moment to appreciate the right we have developed for ourselves to the freedom of expression. Right now, I can still say just about anything I want about pretty much any of the Western liberal governments without fear of prosecution. I can say Reagan was an idiot. Trump is a selfish, greedy, dumbass tyrant and monster who is the worst president the USA has ever had. That Angela Merkel or that Obama, Clinton, Tony Blair all did horrible things to the state of world affairs with their neoliberal light policies, all while patting themselves on the back for being such morally upstanding people. None of that will get me imprisoned. I can also pretty much write whatever I want to about the actions of Western liberal cultures, religions, and governments. Whereas if I was in, say, Russia or China or Myanmar or any of a number of other more authoritarian countries and spoke critically about them or even talked openly about wars they were engaged in or even insulted certain aspects of certain more fundamental religions, I could find myself in some seriously hot water. Even in Thailand, you need to be careful about speaking out against the king. So let's celebrate
Yeah.
our right to the freedom of expression, recognize that it's being threatened, and fight for it because it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I can say what I want about certain Canadian politicians. I'm just not because I don't want to get angry. Um, but it crosses my mind. Like, what if one morning I wake up and we're, like part of America, we've been annexed, and suddenly ICE is able to, like take people away or whatever. I don't know how these things work, but
Yeah, hopefully we won't ever find out, but we gotta stand up and say, hey, this is a great thing. We want to keep it.
exactly.
And I just also want to give you another example of the extent of lack of free speech that I feel like most of us just assume can't happen here. The first husband of my grandmother's friend Betty, yeah, way back when, he was a communist or an anarchist. I forget which. I never met him. He died of cancer long before I was born. And he, like Betty, was Jewish, at least by birth, and they were both Belgian citizens. Back in her 20s, Betty survived World War II via a combination of quick thinking, false papers, and the fact of having taken refuge in a village in the French Alps that happened to be sympathetic towards Jews. A lot of Jews who were fleeing towards Switzerland briefly sheltered in this village because it was near the Swiss border, as they were fleeing what was at the time Nazi France or, presumably other occupied areas of Europe. And the villagers refused to turn these people over to the Germans. Okay, I'm going a little astray here, but I would like to recognize that the people in this village suffered greatly for their kindness towards persecuted people. Because at some point, I think it was in 1945, the Germans, furious about this behavior, visited the village, rounded up all the male residents of service age, and shot them.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Christina, checking in here to correct myself. What happened was that on April 9th, 1944, which was Easter, all the men between the ages of 18 and 45 in the town were rounded up by the Nazis, and 302 of these men were held hostage and deported to Buchenwald, and about more than half of these men actually would end up dying there. So, and this was in general to punish the town for their resistance against the Nazi occupation. Anyway, having fled Belgium shortly before it was invaded by Germany, Betty was living there during the war. And she took in my grandmother and my mother, who was a toddler at that point, after my grandfather was deported to Auschwitz. And my grandmother had no way to pay the rent and no way to buy food or anything like that. So to get to the point of this anecdote, Betty's first husband, that the known communist or anarchist or whatever he was, he survived the Holocaust because he stowed away on the Queen Elizabeth on its way to New York back in the early 1940s. And he did this not because he was afraid of ending up in a concentration camp because he was a Jew. No, and they didn't even know about that part yet. He fled specifically because he was like this communist or anarchist, and he knew that the Nazis would kill him if they got their hands on him because they hated communists and anarchists.
Political opponents.
Indeed, the concentration camp my grandfather ended up dying in, he was sort of starved slash worked to death, it was Ebensee, which is part of the Mauthausen group of camps in Austria, where he was sent in after 10 months in Auschwitz, just, like the day before it was liberated by Western forces. It was there for political prisoners rather than Jews. So most of in fact, they even had Spanish political prisoners, like opponents of Franco there. Yeah, when we went to visit it, the lady was like, wait, he was Jewish? What was he doing here? Normally they just had political prisoners. So, oh, yeah, it was because it was the end of the war, right? So things were crazy and they were shipping people around ahead
We
of
don't learn
the.
about that part of
Yeah,
the well, maybe we do, but I just wasn't paying attention.
it
But
doesn't get as much press as it doesn't get as much press. The Nazis killed a lot of people they didn't like.
yeah.
So again, let's keep exercising our freedom of expression muscle for as long as we can. It's really, really important. You don't want to get sent to a death camp because of your political views, right?
Mhm.
So we're a far cry from having to flee the country in fear of our lives because we're, say, out loud and proud solar punks. And I'd really like to keep it that way. We want to live in a world where we don't have to suppress our opinions, political or otherwise, for fear of incarceration, deportation, or death. And also let's respect the exercising of that muscle by others, so long as they're not being bullies or spewing hateful, harmful things. Right? So let's take a deep breath and not dogpile on people who, say something stupid or make a little mistake or even voice opinions that kind of slightly offend our sensibilities. We also have to show a little bit of tolerance, even for things we disapprove of.
I
Um,
mean, learn, right?
not everybody.
Well, that's
Right.
why you need to give people chances, because there is the possibility that they will learn, and then there's the possibility that they're just being a dick on purpose. So,
Yeah, but we also all don't need to believe the same things. We just need to somehow work harmoniously together in for good things.
true, yes.
So it's great not to be censored by people who are in power, and it's great not to have to censor myself out of fear of my own government. And again, we need to protect that, and part of that is standing up and defending people who are being censored right now.
I totally agree. And I really get the feeling that you're not just talking about like this Second Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Christina breaking in to say what Ariel actually means here is the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. What this is referring to is the free and public expression of opinions without censorship, interference, or restraint by the government. Now, carry on, Ariel.
About sort of all the permutations of free speech in many different countries, no matter how it's specifically worded.
What happens in the USA is contagious. I think, especially since so much of the rest of the world consumes our media. And people all over the place are suddenly complaining, for instance, about the quote unquote woke assault on their freedom of speech, meaning that they believe that their right to free speech is enshrined somehow, like maybe in their country's constitutions. Although they're probably not being that technical about it. And again, they also seem to think it means that they have the freedom to say awful things without censure or, social people being horrified by them. So, not just the idea that you can say what you want, but this idea that we have inalienable free speech, divorced from the idea that the right is about being able to speak out against your government and politicians without persecution, has kind of oozed out into the rest of the world.
Oh man, you are so right. Like, I bring it up because, like, Canada is actually the perfect case study for this, like, the perfect example. We technically don't have the right to free speech. It's not there. It's a bit hard to explain, to the point where the government of Canada actually has a handy guide, like a website specifically dedicated to be a guide to our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But it like basically boils down to the fact that the rights and freedoms of the Charter are not absolute. So they can be limited to protect other rights or important national values. So, for example, freedom of expression can be limited by laws against hate propaganda or child pornography, which, to me makes total sense. So I think the way you define freedom of expression at the beginning of your point makes a lot of sense to me. You're allowed to say what you want, but within reason. If you're inciting violence against other people or you're otherwise breaking the law, the government has the right to come down really hard on you. We can get into a whole discussion about whether the laws are correct or not, but we'll save that for another day.
I think this is an important debate that democratic countries should always be having, right? Where is the line that you shouldn't cross with your speech? Sometimes you all have to be adults about things and you have to agree that, okay, some things are beyond the pale. And even in America, there are things that are beyond the pale that are just, again, socially unacceptable. And, and obviously right now the people in power are actually preventing a lot of speech on Gaza, for instance, because they're using that as a cover for some of their authoritarian power grabs.
The right to be able to protest things. Every time I sign a petition, it came out that CSIS, which is our National Intelligence Agency, which is kind of parallel to the CIA, was tracking like environmental protesters about like a decade ago. So that is the step before the whole hooded thugs thing. So I'm on some list somewhere, I'm sure, and I really don't want the political winds to blow in the way of fascism because I think I would be screwed.
You don't want to be an environmental protester kind of anywhere right now. I mean, they're throwing the book at people in the UK and even Germany, for instance, for even minor offenses associated with anti-fossil fuel protests. And then look at the recent ruling in the US aiming to bankrupt Greenpeace. And and this whole idea that it isn't patriotic to criticize your own country because you want it to be a better place to live, or because you want it to do a better job, or because you don't want to live in the midst of environmental catastrophe, it's just crazy, but I guess that's a whole other discussion.
Can still be a patriotic Canadian while sort of admitting that my country's institutions are more often than not pretty badly run, or maybe shouldn't even exist at all. Like, honestly, in my opinion, the entire Canadian state was just a crime to begin with. But I'm not going so far as to say that we should just then give up and get absorbed into another state who is also founded on multiple crimes. So, like, that wouldn't be helping anybody.
You
On
can't
that
all
note,
just pick up and leave, right? So
yeah, no, that's not, it's not possible. One of the things I think that we should be proud of and fighting hard for is the right for, Indigenous folks on Turtle Island to reclaim their sovereignty and the right for settlers to know the truth about history and to be able to admit that we, screwed up and to learn to do better. It's empathetic evolution writ large.
I kind of hate to say it, but you aren't going to win hearts and minds over to your movement if your intention is to correct people's misguided behavior and naive ideas. I mean, even me saying that is annoying, right? It just makes people hate your cause, our cause. It makes people hate our cause. I feel like that's where the left went wrong in the last few decades, trying to teach quote unquote common people morality lessons instead of trying to fight for people's rights, livelihoods, and privacy, and against the all encroaching security issues and all the wealth distilling straight to the top. That's where we should have been fighting. We shouldn't have been lecturing people about the right way to think about or talk about leaves. We should have been attending to the ragingly burning forest.
Okay, Canada as a state wasn't exactly coming to the Truth and Reconciliation table with honest intentions, but there are many Canadians who are actually going through a process of decolonizing their worldviews, learning about their local Indigenous history, reconnecting with the land, and relearning their history. And a lot of the reason is the government's supposed championing of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So, like, I'm not happy about the international chill on the word decolonization now. What European settlers did to Indigenous ways of life was unconscionable, and their descendants should have the right to at least learn to do better, or be given the tools and knowledge to be good accomplices and race traders. there are a lot of organizations out there that are still fighting tooth and nail for Indigenous rights to just exist, never mind reparations, and not having even just token allyship in companies' use of the word decolonization just makes it that much harder. Like, to fix a problem, you first have to convince people that it exists in the first place. And I see the rollback of all the talk about equity, diversity, and decolonization as a way to sort of pretend that there isn't a problem at all. And so activists just must be complaining about nothing.
Oh my God. Or OMG. Race traders? That is some pretty heated rhetoric. And, it is not equivalent in any way, shape, or form, but, also I'm like an anti-rhetoric person. I do not get me started how I feel about the badge of honor people like to paste onto their chest by calling themselves allies. I mean, to me, that is hogwash, like greenwashing sort of, but it's not about being green, so it's another way of being holier than thou without actually really doing anything. I really think we can fight for a better, more just, more equal, more multicultural world without alienating people by calling them colonialists or race traders or by calling ourselves allies or whatever. When the ship is sinking for everyone but the billionaires, why tell the majority of people in the global north that by virtue of their ancestry, they're immoral? It's not a great way to go about fixing a big and complex injustice. I mean, we're all fighting for the table scraps left over from the billionaires, and we should stop fighting each other, and we should be fighting the billionaires instead. Sometimes this rhetoric immediately turns off a ton of people because we put them on the defensive. And, maybe otherwise they would have seen the sense in things, even if we don't completely politically agree with one another.
But I mean, also on the flip side, it causes a lot of people to stop and sort of rethink their worldviews. And like, as for the label race traitor, in the post-slavery South, any white person who had supported Black people's freedom was labeled a race traitor and marked as a target for violent retribution by the Ku Klux Klan. The term will be used and used against us, even if leftists do not take it up. I think using certain labels with the intention to provoke thought can be helpful. So, like, not everyone reacts to being called an accomplice with immediate rage and rejection of leftist ideals. Some people do. But I don't think we can say that there's like a one size fits all way that humans react to words.
I hear all of that. I hear what you're saying. Again, I have a complicated set of feelings about this. And I wish on the one hand, I feel like we shouldn't pull ourselves toward the center. If we believed in these more leftist things, then we should fight for them. But on the other hand, I think we also need to ally ourselves with a lot of people who at least share some of our values, because it's an existential fight right now. So I really wish that we could look in the mirror and acknowledge the hatred we still have in our hearts and our cultures, because that's what it took for our societies to have committed genocide or to have enslaved other human beings just because of the color of their skin. And I think that really, really messed things up for us. And I think that's why America is so violent right now and angry as well. We turned ourselves into awful, awful people. And I can say that without having had any ancestors who took part in that. And except for I probably have some conquistadors in the bloodline. But anyways, where was I? I wish we could better share the wealth and land of our countries with these people we have wronged during our history. But this reflection and improvement has to be done willingly, honestly, carefully, and without coercion. Like, you can't force people into it. Otherwise, one day, backlash, like right now, we lose all the progress we've made, or a lot of the progress. Because people don't like to be told they're guilty of things that happened before they were born. I mean, even me, I'm like, look, wasn't my ancestors, right? Especially when a lot of people are struggling to make ends meet and they want to be supported or at least acknowledged rather than condemned and told how privileged they are. Because right now, we're all losing to the billionaires.
But I also want to, give people a chance to learn about things, like if, for example, you've never heard of what's going on in terms of Indigenous history, in terms of like oppression, in terms of even like antebellum slavery, like a lot of people don't really know their history very well. Just presenting history as it is, truthfully.
It's a very good thing. I mean, and this is
I
why
think that's
this is why the orange regime is taking down websites, why they're attacking the diversity, equality, and inclusion initiatives and trying to right women and LGBTQ plus people and people of color out of history. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about these things. I think we should be careful about not accusing people or putting people on the defensive. We have to be, I think we have to be more careful about it because I do think we alienate people.
Okay, so your argument is basically that like we should be talking about these things, but we shouldn't be, like weaponizing them.
I think a lot of times we like to make ourselves better than other people, or I really don't know what it is, but I hear all this talk about some of this stuff, and like I feel kind of like defensive about some of it. And and I'm on the team. So what if I wasn't on the team? What if I was a conservative person who also has a reasonable sense of right and wrong and fairness and unfairness, right? We need them on our side. I don't know. It's a complicated issue. But
Yeah.
sometimes we just go off and we use all this terminology and people are like, what are you even talking about? And I don't even know what these words mean and what are you calling me? And
Yeah, I think there's a misinterpretation of things that are presented as facts of history as like, oh, you're using that to call me a terrible person kind of thing and taking it personally. I think that a lot of people have to rid themselves of that programming of taking the facts of history as automatic attacks on their identity because their identities are built upon a denial of that history. And so basically, I'm saying a lot of like inner work has to happen for a lot of people, I guess. And I don't know how that's going to happen at a large scale. But I see your point.
I just kind of feel like there must be some other way to accomplish it rather than saying to people, you're being hypersensitive, you need to do some work on yourself before we can make progress. I mean, that message doesn't really resonate with people. And sometimes if you want to get what you want, you got to find a better way to do it. I don't know. I'm not really good with people, so I'm probably not the right person to be making suggestions.
Yeah, I
But I
think
think
working on a common goal together is sort of the first step, making common cause. And then
yes, and not
but
excluding people from the cause because we
yeah,
think they're not good enough or we think they haven't done the work or let's take what we can get and work with it. Let's make common cause with people against all form of wealth and wage theft and widening inequality, right? And let's push for indigenous rights and workers' rights and for proper taxation of the rich and the ultra rich. And let's work on women's rights and let's work on all sorts of stuff. All sorts of stuff because it's all tied together. And let's not snipe at people who could be our allies in these fights for not being sufficiently anti-colonialist or anti-racist or for not knowing what those words mean or for occasionally saying something that's a little bit rude. Right? Let's work on being decent people who see the humanity in all other human beings and try to right all sorts of wrongs. And I just wish we could focus on what we're getting right and not what people aren't getting right enough.
you're feeling that complicated because it's a complicated subject. Sounds like it should be so simple, right? Like just get along with other people. Don't hurt other people. Don't say things that will hurt other people. Maybe you don't even know that things that you say hurt someone. Like maybe the idioms that you use in your language are based on like a violent history and you don't know that. Is someone going to tell you or not? So those are difficult questions, right? People contain multitudes and tend to be extremely complicated.
So I want to talk about something we could maybe all unite around.
Oh, okay.
Like all of us, most of us, anyways. Because and it's also another thing that we may soon no longer be able to take as for granted as the rising of the sun, and that's a relatively low level of corruption in some of our global north countries. And
Hmm.
I'm not saying zero, I'm saying relatively low compared to the rest of the world. So, look at all the buildings that unnecessarily collapsed in the earthquake in Turkey a couple of years ago, because not because they didn't have building codes that were up to snuff, but because corrupt officials took bribes or skimmed off profits instead of making sure buildings were built to those standards. Right? And look at all the places in the world where politicians suck all the wealth out of the country into their own offshore bank accounts. Or look at all the places where you can't get anything done unless you bribe countless petty officials. Instead, we live in places where we can fairly rightly assume our food is safe to eat, our medicines are unadulterated, buildings won't collapse on a whim, We don't have to pay protection to the local mafia, and we don't have to bribe police officers. But we are in danger of losing this, as the big orange man baby and his billionaire sidekick dismantle democratic institutions, destroy international cooperation, and blow up checks and balances in order to turn the whole world into a kleptocracy. Corruption's bad because once it takes root, it's really hard to get rid of. And it destroys everything, it rots everything. So I think this sort of issue, fighting against corruption, is the sort of thing that can unite people on all sides of the political aisles, except for maybe the far right. So long as we take aim at corruption, regardless of the political stripe carrying it out. So, like here in Germany, so I've been shocked by the amount of corruption in politics and in almost all the parties. And, these people get caught doing things that they should be imprisoned for. And then they just, after 6 or months or a year in the political desert, they come back. And you're like, what the hell? you know? And you can say this for the Social Democrats, you can say this for the Christian Democrats, I mean, it's just like, ah, and it's one of the reasons why people in Germany are so angry. I think here in Germany, you could start an anti-corruption movement, and that would maybe counter some of the voters going to the far right. Or maybe that's being naive, but I think as long as you are honest about it and you don't care about the political party of the person who's committed the corruption and you try to get them prosecuted.
I feel like our province is being run by a mafia boss sometimes. So,
Oh, why is that?
oh, just the whole like deals with developers that help their shady billionaire friends kind of thing.
Right, exactly. This is exactly the sort of thing that's wrong, and it's a road to hell.
People keep voting for him. He won with the majority back in February. But he's got his tough on Trump tuck going on for him. So, you know,
Yeah.
he strategically maneuvered that at a very good time. So, yes.
Well, and then you've got all this the BS that the Trump administration is currently engaging in that looks like it's fighting corruption but of course it isn't. This mass firing of people and defunding of agencies that they disagree with is clearly illegal and corrupt. It's a double-edged sword because you can pick it up and say, "Oh, I'm fighting corruption," and then you can just get rid of your political enemies. But so, as with all things we fight for, we need to fight for, honestly, the right reasons and with calm and clear heads. And we can't let corruption corrupt our attempts to make things better. But, I am really happy I live in a place that is relatively uncorrupt. And I think it makes my life a whole lot easier not to have to deal with all of the BS and the bribes and all the other stuff that would be an obstacle towards you thriving. And we totally take the lack of corruption for granted. So this is something I want to flag and say this is a great thing that we have achieved, and that is not true in huge parts of the world, and it's under attack, and we should be fighting for it because it's wonderful. It is wonderful. Let's celebrate the fact that we reached the point where we have a good set of safe, fair, and clearly defined standards for just about everything, and agencies that safeguard and enforce those standards with integrity for the benefit of society. And those are being dismantled right now. And I'm not saying that it was perfect. I'm not saying it was never unfair and that it was never unjust. It was a continual learning process. Sometimes there was too much bureaucracy, and sometimes evil people got in there and did bad things. But
Just the fact that they existed at all.
yeah, yeah, and just this idea that we had agreed upon, that things have to be done fairly, with integrity and honesty for the benefit of people who make up a society. We've forgotten this is one of the things government is supposed to do, and this is one of the things these government agencies are doing, and this is why it's so horrific that they're being dismantled. I'll fight for that lack of corruption, and I'll fight for adherence to reasonable standards any day because I think this is one of the greatest things that we had accomplished as people.
Yeah, I mean, same here. Like, I think that standardization is something that we should not lower our standards.
No. No, I
Uh,
mean, that doesn't mean everything has to be standardized. Like, things do not need to be made equal and
Not
same, right? That's
everything,
not what I'm saying.
but
But that you have to say, like, you can't put this kind of stuff in foods, and that these chemicals are unsafe, and these are safe working conditions, and this and that, and you have to do it honestly. And we built up I mean, there's a National Institute for Standards. Thank God they haven't started getting that one yet, right? I mean, you have to agree on weights and measures. And okay, we're moving a little bit away from corruption, except that standards are one way you fight corruption. And
It's
having legal standards, at least you can say, this person was treated unfairly. This person was discriminated against, right? If you have a standard, right? So standards, upholding standards is a very important part of fighting corruption.
another thing that we should be proud of is gender equality, I think. Like we've come a long way to the point where a lot of people don't actually think that feminism is very relevant anymore.
Oh, that's just the furious howls of patriarchy speaking via brainwashed minds. I mean, those are the same people who call feminists feminazis, as if feminists have been rounding men and trad wives up into camps and gassing them.
Like, I think feminism is more relevant than ever now, but things like doctors taking women seriously and proportion of women involved in X industry in important roles is a bit less tangible than like the right to vote or the wage gap, for example.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you've ever had a doctor not take you seriously, or anyone else not take you seriously, and never mind once, but tons and tons and tons of times, because you're just a little lady, it's pretty tangible and infuriating.
Yeah, it's tangible to you, but until very recently, a lot of people with female bodies didn't talk about their medical woes in public or even to friends, and it really wasn't widely known. So there's a ton of shame and stigma around the female body just like existing. Never mind if there's something going on that involves female genitalia. People aren't going to talk about that at the dinner party.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the dinner party, but yeah, I'm thinking the last few dinner parties I've been to. Yeah, yeah. Not just about the body issues, but I don't know how any woman, no matter how mild-mannered in her younger years, gets to middle age without reaching the point of wanting to burn it all down. Um,
I am with you in this boat of puzzlement
oh, that's such a
because
nice expression.
I'm adrift. I guess perhaps if one happens to be rich and not like have any health problems literally at all ever.
Yeah, and has had maybe few interactions with males and not seen any Hollywood movies. I mean, I don't know. Actually, speaking of that, I just watched Priscilla the other night because it's on Netflix right now. It's the story of Priscilla and Elvis's marriage from the
Uh,
point of view of Priscilla as a Sofia Coppola movie. And oh, by the end of this movie, I was just like burning with rage against the patriarchy. Elvis was not very nice to Priscilla.
what a surprise.
Yeah, I don't know. Everyone thinks of Elvis as a good guy, but he was, kind of a jerk,
I
kind
don't
of a
know.
patriarch.
I just kind of like my default assumption of how relationships that are old-timey went is has flipped, let's say. Anyways, the
Anyways,
Trump administration's defunding of Planned Parenthood kind of has this on my mind. There's a very obvious ploy to basically just control and subjugate American women back into the home where they obey their husbands and even sons,
or
and
Elvis
toppling,
Presley.
yes, and toppling what is perhaps the largest organization in America that is dedicated to women's bodily autonomy is a major step towards making that nightmare into a reality. Like, as I said before, if you take away a person's ability to identify that there is a problem, the struggle shifts from let's fix this problem to this is a thing that exists and is a problem actually. Now I have to fight to just be recognized. Fighting to just have women's health acknowledged as a legitimate field or an area of concern is something that, as a child, I naively thought that we were totally past. And now that I'm older, I realize that that's never really been true. But effectively cutting the head off of Planned Parenthood is a serious blow to the feminist movement here in North America. There's even a Planned Parenthood in Toronto that I went to for years to get low cost birth control. And I don't know what's going to happen to that little clinic, you know? What I do know is that a lot of the rights that women identified people enjoy, like voting or getting your own credit card without your husband's sign off, or traveling alone without a male chaperone, or the right not to be raped by your husband, or even ensuring that girls have equal access to the education that is granted to boys just automatically. Those are all hard won rights, and they're not even that old. Like most of what I said was only ensured in the 20th century. Women's rights as we know them in Canada and America have existed for like less than 100 years.
Way less than that, less than half a century, with respect to being able to have your own credit card or bank account or mortgage without your male owner's permission, even in places like the UK. That was true up until like the late 70s. Like that you couldn't just go into a bank and get a credit card or whatever without your husband's permission. And I've been alive longer than Swiss women have had the right to vote, and I'm definitely not a century old, no matter how it is I feel sometimes.
You make a good point. Like, I mean, the right to vote, it's not like, like the right to vote for every single woman was, ensured at the exact same time. It was very, very widely dispersed across countries and even within countries. Like, if you were a white woman, you got the right to vote. And then maybe like 15 years later, like we were thinking about giving black women the vote. And then maybe, indigenous women can have the vote another 10 years after that or something like that.
I recently
So
had to take a civics test, a German civics test. And the questions were all online and you could read about them. You just needed to know basic things about the structure of the government and how laws are passed and da 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 da, and about voting. And so one of the questions has to do with like who you're allowed to vote for, and it's multiple choice questions. Mostly the answers are very obvious, but one of the answers for what kind of people are you allowed to vote for? And one of the answers was the person my husband tells me I should vote for. Obviously, that was not the right answer, but they even felt that they needed to put that in there. And and you never know. You're like, do people really who have come here from other countries, like in the Middle East, for instance, as refugees or whatever, do they really actually do that? I mean, I have no idea. I have no idea. I can't imagine it. I can't imagine that this is actually an issue, but
I
I,
mean, it's
I
an issue even in like Canada and definitely America. There was that huge, I mean, like there was that Kamala Harris advertisement specifically targeting Republican women, saying you don't have to vote for who your husband tells you to.
That is so crazy. I also had to take a civics class in France once, and the lady teaching it, she was very French and she was very obnoxious. Most of the people sitting around the table were from like Algeria originally or whatever. And she was lecturing them about how in France, a man can only have one wife. And one of the people, obviously totally fed up with this woman, and I mean, she was just so condescending, was like, "Well, actually, most of the presidents of France have had secret second families." So we were all like, "Yeah, go, go, go." She was not impressed with that, but I thought it was a fair point. So the patriarchy runs deep in a lot of places.
It's just sort of, it just has a different mask in different places, but it's so,
Places just to pretend to be more decent than others. I mean, obviously there are parts of the world where it's absolutely horrible to be a woman, where it's like literally you're courting death to be a woman because of the way you're treated and the things that people do to you. So I shouldn't make light of it, but sometimes we also need to clean out our own cupboards, I think, before condemning other places.
exactly. The, whole like biblical take the speck out of your own eye before you take the plank out of another's eye, I think is
Oh, that's an interesting
the
expression.
quote. Yeah,
Okay.
it's basically don't judge other people before you like put your own house in order kind of thing. Like get your stuff together before you go around like telling other people what to do.
Yeah, sometimes a little self-reflection is in order. So right now we're remodeling the kitchen because it was like 50 years old and
Uh-huh.
yeah. And the guy who comes in to do some of the like plastering and stuff like that. Oh, I think he's like 13 years younger than I am. He's a nice guy, but sometimes I just have to grit my teeth.
Mhm.
So Germans like white walls, and I hate white walls. I hate them. I hate walls should be colorful. A couple white walls fine, but and so the last room he painted for us, yeah, the paint didn't come out quite the color I had ordered. So I'm a little annoyed about that. So it came out as like this robin's egg blue. It's not bad actually, and it's just a small little room, and it's we've got our the water reservoir for our heat pump in it. So we were talking about what the color the walls are going to be in the kitchen and so all this kind of stuff. And he was like explaining to his father, who was along for the ride for some reason, And he was like, "Oh yeah, the little lady likes color on the walls." And I was just like, "I'm gonna fucking punch this guy." Like,
The automatic reaction to being called little lady. Uh,
"Rah."
maybe if you're my uncle, and also if you're my grandmother or grandfather, like nobody else, like no other man is allowed to call me little lady. Like
Yeah, yeah,
that's a
yeah. And certainly not someone 13 years younger than him. He meant it
yeah,
well, right? But I'm still
yeah.
like, it's still putting me in my place.
That's probably how he was brought up to speak about, like clients and stuff like that. So like that just was totally normal to him.
Yeah,
This,
he thinks he's being friendly, but I'm just like,
what's
he would have never said, if he was talking about my spouse who is male, he would have not said Herrchen, he would have.
yeah. It's a good illustration of how some people can think they're being friendly and then accidentally like say something horrible to somebody else.
That
You know?
upholds the patriarchy
Yeah,
by
exactly.
putting a woman in her place.
Yeah, those are the kind of people that need to be called in and told like, hey, that was kind of shitty.
So I think feminism has a long ways to go still. Sorry, the older I get, the more I'm like I didn't even know patriarchy existed until a couple of years ago, and now I'm like,
Oh
I
wow.
hate it. I hate it.
I mean, I did a double degree in women and gender studies and English back in my BA. And I mean,
Yeah,
like also
that would
also
have blown my little brain in my 20s.
I mean, growing up, like my mom was an ardent second wave feminist. And so, I just always knew that feminism was a thing. I can't remember ever learning about it. And I could like start picking clearly out like things that were facet of the patriarchy, even in elementary school.
Even as a little kid, you're aware that like you run like a girl or you throw like a girl. I mean, you pick up very, very soon that girl things are inferior. When I was young, I was like, this is horrible. And my answer to that was to try not to associate myself with female things.
Yeah, that's
It's also
what
wrong answer.
yeah, I mean, it's just shunting yourself into another box that the patriarchy has made for women. Like there's the female woman and there's the non-female woman. Also, the acknowledgement that there are more than just the two genders and breaking the shell of toxic masculinity are both pretty huge leaps forward in our species' evolution of the mind, and I credit feminism for it. Not like that feminists invented other genders than the Western binary of male and female. That would be ridiculous, or like single-handedly dismantled the violent patriarchal behavioral stuff that boys and men have to go through. But that in the West, it was the feminists that pointed to these possibilities and highlighted them. So even within the structures of patriarchal capitalism, people were finding new ways of gender expression that made them feel more in touch with their own humanity.
We need to be fighting for all of it, and I think we also need to be fighting against backsliding. And I guess to say that progress on people treating other people decently, personally, politically, and legally does not advance on all fronts simultaneously. But if we want to hang on to the more open and equal society that we had achieved, at least in terms of progress towards women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights and freedoms, we are going to have to buckle down and fight for them. Fight for things like Planned Parenthood. We're going to have to go back to fighting for gay marriage. We're going to really need to help trans people out because like what's happening to them is atrocious right now. These freedoms are great to have as individuals, and it's great to have these freedoms as a society, even if these rights don't apply to you because you're not a woman or you're not LGBTQ plus, etc. and so forth, because we all gain when all people are treated with respect, fairness, and dignity. It's just a better place to live.
A rising tide lifts all boats, one might say, or it's the curb cut effect. Basically, when disability rights activists asked for like curb cuts to happen,
Oh, right. Like little driveways in the sidewalk
yeah, yeah, that
at stop
actually
signs
helped
and
enormously for like women who were pushing baby carriages or people who were pulling wagons, or like it helped all kinds of
kids
other
on
people,
bicycles. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
old people who
My dad in his little electric scooter because
yeah,
he's like
exactly.
89 years old.
Like, or people who can't lift their legs that high, like, and have to take small, tiny steps or whatever. You never know. There's so many people who like benefited from that one single action. So yeah, a rising tide lifts all boats. And by the way, neither of us are saying that the world as it was some paragon of equality and utopic freedom, like not by a long shot. But there's always good mixed in with the bad. As Leonard Cohen wrote, there's cracks, but that's where the light gets in, right?
Oh my God, I can't believe you're quoting Leonard Cohen as an optimistic thing.
We all know Leonard Cohen. No, we don't all know Leonard Cohen. I'm just,
No, I know Leonard. Well, he's Canadian, huh?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And,
He
he,
definitely was not a solar punk.
no, no, like I've definitely read his other poetry and yeah, let's just put it that way. So,
Oh, okay. Well, I like his music.
yeah,
His music.
yeah. So to quote lyrics that maybe are a bit more solar punk. So you've got to kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight. That's from Bruce Cockburn's album Stealing Fire, by the way, which was mostly inspired by his time in Central America in 1983. He went with the Canadian charity Oxfam.
Christina, having to jump in here because I lived in the UK for a while. Oxfam, as suggested by its name, is originally a British charity. It was founded in Oxford, England in 1942 to help people who were hungry or even literally starving because of the effects of World War II. And by this I don't mean hunger in Britain, but in occupied areas of Europe due to things like fighting and naval blockades. Today, Oxfam works, although not without controversy, fighting hunger and poverty and providing relief from all sorts of crises all over the world. Oxfam International currently has 21 affiliates, including 2 organizations in Canada, Oxfam Canada and Oxfam Quebec, because Canada is like that, and if you know what I mean, you know what I mean. And now back to Ariel's anecdote.
He was visiting refugee camps, spending time with freedom fighters, and immersed in the politics of dictators and Reagan-era political meddling in Central America. I feel like it fits. Cockburn was Canadian also.
Okay, I
So
don't know his music, but that's a nice gotta kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight. I like that. That's what we're doing. But also you also not just kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight, you also gotta keep supporting the daylight that you already kicked out of the darkness.
yeah, that's true.
As
Appreciate
I
what
strangle this metaphor to death.
I think it's really important for a lot of activists in specific, a lot of solar punks to just every once in a while, just like appreciate what you have and think about all the wins that you've made over the past little while, like that is actually something that gives you strength. It is something that will really help you gain energy for fighting the good fight, basically, because knowing that, to butcher, the Lord of the Rings quote from Sam, there's good in the world and it's worth fighting for. That's actually really strengthening. It's good to know that there are other people and other things out there that are, working towards the same goals that you are.
Yeah, we have a lot of cool aspects to our societies, a lot of cool rights, a lot of cool freedoms, a lot of cool ways of doing things, and right now we should be defending them. And we can't just take them for granted. We can't. We can't because we'll lose them if we take them for granted any longer. So here's to recognizing all of the wonderful things that we have and standing and asking what can we do to strengthen them. And that's a wrap for this episode. So get out there, Solarpunks, and fight that good fight. Thank you for listening to Solarpunk Presents, a podcast hosted and produced by Ariel Kroon and Christina de la Rocha.
The audio for this episode was recorded in part on the traditional territory of the neutral Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples.
And in Germany. The opening and closing music for this podcast is Water Cooler Gang by Monkey Warhol, available for use under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.
Don't forget to support us on Patreon at patreon.com/solarpunkpresents.
Every little bit helps us keep bringing you discussions and interviews.
Until the next episode, keep dreaming.
And stay solarpunk.